Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the second day of the semifinals in the Skilling Open, and boy, is it exciting. Nakamura and Nepomniachtchi need to win their matches in order to take the games to Blitz and perhaps Armageddon. They have to win in order to stay in the tournament, and the game I wanted to show you was Jan against Magnus, their very first game. A very thrilling and exciting game that I'm looking forward to show you guys. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the Spanish opening. Very common, of course. Knight f6 is slightly more solid. The Berlin defense, but Magnus, he didn't want to play that. He played a6, which is the other main move in this position. No knight e7 this time. So a6, bishop a4, knight f6. Everything is theory so far. Castles. He is kind of protecting this pawn indirectly. It doesn't really... Well, black doesn't win a pawn. Although this is a line which is interesting. It goes like d4, b5, bishop b3, d5, d takes e5, and bishop e6. This is called the Open Spanish, and it's a completely different story. Certainly possible to play for black. A very interesting line, but it's not that common. So bishop e7 is by far the most common move, and now black is for real threatening to take on e4. So there are two ways to defend, which are both very popular. The first move is rook e1, and the second one is d3, which is what Jan goes for. I can mention that rook e1 has been the main move for many years. It is perhaps the most critical move, and the game usually goes like b5, bishop b3, d6, c3, castles, and here white waits with d4. He prefers to play h3 first in order to avoid bishop g4. And here black has several moves, for example knight a5, knight b8, and bishop b7. All of those are huge main lines, massive theory. And this line here, which is quite new with knight d7, has become very popular on top level. At least 2600 players have played this a lot. So these positions are very interesting, very rich in both strategical and tactical elements. I find the positions very difficult to play with both colors, to be honest. They're very weird. It's not so easy to play them. Spanish positions are very complicated, but this is the most critical way to go. But d3 is by all means, this is not a bad move. It's not a move that's not critical either. It was played a lot a few years ago, not as much as it used to be played, but it's a way to try for an advantage. It's slightly slower and perhaps a bit more strategical. But the plan remains the same. It's very similar to an Italian, really. White will play c3, knight bd2, rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, and perhaps h3 later, and then also strike in the center with d4. So let's see what black does. It plays d6, c3, castles, knight bd2. All of these moves have been expected. And rook e8. You notice that this bishop here is slightly poor, so black wants to improve the position of the bishop, so he prefers to get it to g7. So we'll play bishop f8, g6, bishop g7. A very common move in the Spanish, pretty much always played. Another plan is to play b5, knight a5, and c5. Also very common as well. So let's see what happened. Rook e1, bishop f8. And here, Jan Nepomniachtchi makes a very interesting choice. Well, if you're going to continue the plan, h3 is what makes sense to avoid bishop g4. But instead, he's decided to strike in the center immediately with d4, which I don't think is a bad move. It's a very interesting decision. Perhaps even the best move in the position. b5, bishop c2. And Magnus, he goes for an interesting a try here. E takes d4. It's certainly not a bad move at all. It just makes the position slightly different. If you want to remain mysterious, as I like to call it, then you can play bishop e7. And later, maybe knight b8, knight b d7, because the knight is better placed on d7 than on c6. And knight a5 is now not so desirable, because you don't get knight a5 of a tempo due to the bishop having moved to c2. On the other hand, you could get take on d4 followed by knight b4 in a few cases. So e takes d4, c takes d4, bishop g4, pinning the knight, so knight takes d4 is a threat. This is prevented with knight f1. Magnus goes for g6. As I said, this plan with bishop g7 is very common, very logical. Jan continues with knight g3. Bishop g7 from Magnus, which is perhaps not the best move. In this position in particular, because of this bishop here, there is a pin on this knight. Jan Nepomniachtchi has simply said that I don't care if you take on f3, because I'll take back with a g-pawn, and this pawn structure here is honestly pretty good for me. He doesn't care. He doesn't think it is a big deal. Magnus, he doesn't take it either, which means that his judgment is probably right. And also, these pawns could become quite dangerous with f4, d5, e5, perhaps in the future. But he had this interesting move here with knight b4, wanting to take the bishop. You never want to give away this bishop, so bishop b1 is the automatic response. And then black takes his chance to play c5. That is the point of knight b4, really. And these positions are not so easy for for white. Knight c6 could come now, and black would get a nice square on d4. So the way to continue would be to play something like d5. So knight c6 is not possible. It looks like this knight is out of play, but it's not really true, because I can play a5 and then put my knight on a6. So there are no problems. And now I have a decent amount of space here on the queen side, and perhaps even a slightly better position. So knight b4 would have been a very interesting move. But bishop g7 is what the Magnus does, which is a very logical move, of course, but not the best one. Bishop e3, knight d7. So he wants to take and then take on d4. Jan, he doesn't really care about that either. He plays rook c1. Bishop takes f3, and again, he doesn't care. He thinks that this pawn structure here is alright for white. And he is indeed correct. This is not bad at all. And if black is not careful, then it could end this could end very badly. Well, we're now threatening some things here. So black needs to be quite careful. He needs to be straightforward. If not, he's going to have a very bad position. Like if he was going to play something like this, then I'm just going to push my pawns, and the computer already says it's winning for white, which is kind of crazy, but not very surprising. All of these pawns are just far too strong. e5 comes, f5, and the game is over very quickly. And same goes with something like knight a5, b3 simply, and then f4 later, and e5. Very bad for black as well. So black is forced to play this move, and it's very difficult to protect this pawn, because if I play knight e2, queen takes f3 is possible. So Jan chooses to play bishop e3. So this is a tactical sequence. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, and rook takes e7. In return, white has gotten a very nice bishop here on the b3 and an active rook on c7. Black has gotten some nice squares here on c5 and on e5, while these pawns could become slightly weak, because this center is not dangerous anymore, or not that dangerous anymore, due to the fact that this d4 pawn here is gone. Rook a7 is a very good offensive move. Notice how both of these pieces here, they protect the rook on a7. So if I'm going to take, the bishop still defends a7. But Jan takes on a7 and then on d6, and he's officially a pawn up, although this doesn't last long due to bishop takes b2, and the position is balanced. It's a very interesting position where anything can happen, but the objective evaluation is equality here. So well played by both sides, a good game. f4 by Jan Nepomniachtchi, knight c5 by Magnus, logical. He gets activity. He's also threatening to take the bishop, so Jan doesn't want to allow that. He plays bishop d5, and now Magnus uses his chance to play bishop d4. And we have a very interesting position. It's I noticed that I've said that quite a lot, but it's just a very exciting game where anything really can happen. I do like black here. Knight d3 could come, attacking quite a few things. And it's not so easy to be white. You also may wonder what happens if I take here and then on d4, but this is not so dangerous because I have knight e6 and knight takes f4 or queen takes f4, where black at least will stand slightly better. So Jan plays rook e2, knight d3, and then king g2. His plan is actually to play king f3 in a few cases, just to protect this weak pawn on f4, and it's not so dumb. Magnus plays the move king g7, which is alright. It's not the best move. The best move would have been to play queen b6 with the idea of getting this endgame. And this endgame is very comfortable for black. It's even clearly better due to white having several weaknesses in his camp. And these two pawns here could become quite strong. For example, king f3. Something like knight b4 is unpleasant. Could take the bishop in the future, or simply just, if the bishop moves, a5, a4, and knight c6, knight d4 is not so simple. Even rook d8, and I mean black is pretty active, and I like black, and he has indeed a clearly better position in that endgame. It's not so easy to evaluate. King g7 also makes sense. Rook d2, bishop c5, queen c6, and this is a kind of a tactical continuation here. I'm sure you have to see this in this position. So Jan is thinking. He sees that bishop c5 is a threat followed by knight takes f4. But he feels like after rook d2 it works out for me. And Magnus disagrees. It works out for him, he says. So bishop c5, knight takes f4, king f3. I'm attacking two pieces, the rook and the knight. And what do I do now as black? How do you defend this? And it's not easy. First of all, I can choose to sacrifice an exchange for rook e6, bishop takes, knight takes, and I'm probably alright as black due to the black squares being significantly weak. So it would be way better to have this pawn on e3 instead of e4. But the pawn is on e4 and the position is roughly equal if this happens. Another way is to play bishop b4. This works tactically. It's kind of crazy why it works, but something like rook c2, simply queen b8. And the sole reason why this works is tactically, because if rook takes b4, I have rook c8, and then rook c3 next, and this king is completely naked and it's lost. It's just a very wild line. So I think Magnus didn't see that. It's a very difficult move to find after rook b2, and that's why I didn't play bishop b4, I think. Because if I take the rook, then obviously this is good for black. I'm sure he saw this. This is not so hard to see, because I'm threatening to take the bishop and then play f6. So queen e5, f6, and then I take the bishop and there's no attack. I'm sure Magnus saw that. But rook b2 is a logical way to go, and the only move is queen b8, and that's very difficult to find, because you have to see this in this position. So Magnus, he played rook d8 instead, which is an inaccuracy. However, it's not the end of the world. And indeed, after king takes f4, rook d6, the position is balanced. But what happens next is very remarkable. So Jan, he has two moves to move the queen. He can go to e8 or he can go to c8. He can also go to a8, but then I take the rook. So that's not possible. So if I play queen e c8, the position is objectively a draw. After this move, bishop takes f2. However, this is not always the case. Here, Jan, he played queen e8, which is a losing move. But after bishop takes f2, white is in fact winning. It's crazy how this is winning now, but with the queen on c8, it's not winning. It's very strange. But I think the primary reason is that when the queen is on e8, we're threatening to take on f7, which often leads to mate after queen f8. And here, black is winning. So if you want to, you can pause the video and see if you can find it. It is not such a difficult move to find if you see the idea, because there are two ideas behind the move. Remember, queen a8 was not possible because the rook was hanging. That is an important thing to keep in mind. So if I play like if I play the best move here, queen c7, I'm now threatening rook d8 check and winning the queen. Rook e6, I mean, sorry. I'm also threatening rook takes d5, all kind of discoveries. But the huge threat here, is rook d8. And it's impossible to guard yourself for both, because if I play queen e5, simply f6, and black wins. And let's say I move the king, then rook d8 comes. And the only way I can defend my queen and save it is queen c6. But I can simply take and take on f2. And this is completely winning for black. So queen c7 is a move Magnus should have seen. I think he was low on time at this point, that's why he missed it. But he definitely should have seen it. It's not such a very difficult move to find, but you know, when you're in there in the moment and you are low on time, it's easy to miss things you normally never would miss. And it's the case here, indeed. The hard thing to see is that you're threatening rook d8. That's the hard thing to see. But I'm sure he thought that bishop takes f2 was good, so he just went for it. But this is losing due to the brilliant move by Jan here. The brilliant move, and a very logical move, is king g4. And normally this is not losing because queen e3 here would have led to a draw. But that doesn't happen here because of queen takes f7 is mate. So that's the reason why queen c8 is a draw, but it is the best move. Queen c8 prevents queen c7, that's why it's not losing. Queen e8 loses to queen c7, but Magnus didn't find it. Because of that, he is losing. Because he can no longer play queen e3, and if he cannot do that, he's a piece down with too little compensation. And the problem is that after rook f6, I simply play e5. I chase away the rook. And black doesn't have enough for the piece. h5, king h3. The king is perfectly safe. The white king is perfectly safe. And the advantage is hitting astronomical heights here for white. Rook f4. e6 is a very good move. Try to open up the position even more. And it's never dangerous. It never is. Because if I play something like queen e3, which always looks dangerous, I can just take here. If I take the rook, then this is going to be checkmate after f8. Rook takes, queen e7 check, and this is a mate in a few moves. Might as well just show it. It's a pretty mate. There we go. Nice mate. So f takes e6 is more or less forced, and then simply bishop takes. And now this king is weak. Queen g8 and knight takes h5, a lot of moves. And after bishop d4, the beautiful move knight takes h5, and black is officially mated after takes rook g2, rook e6, bishop e3. And Magnus resigned. It's just mate. It was a very, very fun game. Jan Nepomniachtchi is closer to the Blitz match. He needs in order to hang on. This is very exciting stuff. A very fun game, which could have gone either way. I think both players played very well. Magnus had his chance with knight b4 earlier. I think I like this quite a bit, but also later with queen b6 trading off the queens here was kind of a key moment for Magnus, because this position here is just extremely complicated, where it's very difficult as a human being to play this. And as I said, bishop b4, as the reason he missed it is that he didn't see queen b8 in this position, which is a computer move. Very difficult to see. And after rook d6, the blunder queen e8, he should have seen queen c7, but again, it's not so easy when you are in the moment. And in standard chess, he would have easily found it. And it's just, this was the difference between a victory and a loss, because he didn't find it. I ended up having a lost position, and that was just one mistake. Pretty much one mistake. Magnus himself is going to say he played a very bad game. I disagree. I think he found lots of good moves there with rook a7, and he defended very well. But in time trouble, it happens. You mess up and you blunder. That's just the way it is in Rapid. Great game for Jan Nepomniachtchi, though, who is closer to qualifying, and it will be exciting to see if he manages to take the games to Blitz and then perhaps even Armageddon. Stay tuned.